Hello, and welcome to this tutorial where I'm going to show you how to deploy applications on Heroku and connect them to Oracle Content Management using the Experience Orchestration feature. The following is the written tutorial that we will be going through in this video format. For this tutorial, you will need an account with Oracle Content Management, GitHub, and Heroku. The first thing we need is a sample site to deploy. For this demonstration, we'll be using the OCE View blog sample, which can be found at github.com/oracle/OCE-view-blog-sample. This is a public sample written by Oracle that we want to put into our personal account. We can do so by clicking this fork button here. Forking this repository will create that repository under our personal Robin Marlowe dev account publicly. Now we are ready to deploy this application code from our personal GitHub repository onto a Heroku app. Let's go to Heroku, and once we've signed in, we can go to New and Create New App. Let's give the app a name. We'll call it the Oracle Experience Orchestration Demo and create the app. It will lead you to the Deploy tab here, and for the deployment method, let's select GitHub. And my GitHub account is already associated with Heroku, but if it's not, you might need to follow some authorization steps to get this in place. But since it is, let's search for the repository name and connect that repository. If we scroll down, there's two sections. There's an automatic deploy section and a manual deploy section. For the first time, we'll need a manual deploy on the main branch, and we can do so by clicking this Deploy Branch button. What this does is it takes the latest code on the main branch from GitHub and builds that code here. You can see it's looking in the package.json file and installing some dependencies right now. There's a build log associated with this build, and this is particularly helpful in case you have any build errors, and the build errors will show up in the build log, and those messages can help you debug what error is going on in case you do encounter those. For the automatic deploy section, what this does is that on any code changes within that repository for this specific branch, we can enable an automatic deploy, which will create a deployment on the same site without having to come into Heroku, go to manual deploy, and click that button again. It is an optional setting for this Experience Orchestration demo, but if you want to enable it, you can enable it here. Let's wait for this build to finish. It looks like it has succeeded. And notice that the name of the URL is the name of the Heroku app.herokuapp.com. So we have Oracle Experience Orc Demo.herokuapp.com. And this is our blog sample. We can just click around, notice that the sample is working just fine. And notice here, it just says how to for the first asset. Later in this demonstration, we'll do a experience orchestration process by changing an asset in Oracle Content Management such that this will say how to make coffee in a preview context. So far, we've connected GitHub to Heroku and deployed an application. Now let's create an experience object in Oracle Content Management to further this process. So let's log into Oracle, and then under the Experiences tab, which is these three squares right here, let's create a new experience by clicking this Create button. The name of the experience, anything is fine. We'll call it a sample experience. And then the description will be the Experience Orchestration Demo video. And finally, there's this experience URL as well. The experience URL is the current live state of the site that you want to see the previews for without affecting the site because it is in production. It's an optional parameter, and since we don't have a production site for the blog, we'll just leave it blank for now. And we'll finish. The next step here is to configure the outgoing webhooks. The outgoing webhooks trigger deployments from Oracle Content Management to Heroku based on content changes in a repository or publishes in a channel. So let's just give a name for this target right here. We'll call it the Heroku build API endpoint. And for Heroku, we'll be sending a post request to the following URL, where name of your Heroku app is the Oracle Experience Orc Demo. And for this demonstration, we'll do on any publishes in the OCE Getting Started channel, it will trigger this request. And the OCE Getting Started channel is the channel associated with the content in the blogs. So for the headers, we will need 3 headers. We will need an authorization, an accept, and a content type. For the authorization, we will need an API key from Heroku, which you can find by going back to Heroku and going to our account settings. If we scroll down, there's an API key section. So I will reveal the key and copy the key. And the value is bearer, B-E-A-R-E-R, space, and that token. For accept, we will always have the same value, which will be application /vnd.heroku plus JSON, semicolon space, version equals 3. This is always going to be the same for the accept. And for the content type, it will be application /JSON. And this, again, will always be the same for the content type. Now we'll need to build the body. And for the body, we are looking to have a source blob, source_blob, and we will need a URL, as well as a version. Let's go back to the tutorial and go to configuring the outgoing webhooks. We scroll down a bit. We have the URL here. For public repositories, the URL is the following, and for private repositories, it is this. The main difference here is this user : token, where user for private repositories represents your username, and token is an access token that you need to generate within GitHub to access your GitHub private repository. But since we are dealing with a public repository, let's continue with this one. Put that here. And then the username, our GitHub username was Robin Marlowe Dev. Repository name was the OCE View blog sample. And then the branch was the main branch. For the version, we will be putting in a target identifier token, which we can just copy that and put that here. The target identifier token is a unique token that when sent from Oracle Content Management to Heroku, Heroku will send it back to us such that we know that that build was triggered from this specific request, and we can process it later on in the Events tab with this given name. So let's apply those changes. And we can also test these changes, and we also need to enable this outgoing webhook as well. So let's click the test button to do a quick test. We can see our request has been sent, and we can go to the Events tab for further details. And we can see this is the request with the same name. Here are some details. It's a post request, this URL, these parameters. And then, yeah, so let's go to Heroku and check out that build. Go to our account, go to this application, and we can see that the build is currently in progress. In the meantime, let's configure the incoming webhooks, which tell us the status of the build, and this is what Heroku will send back to Oracle Content Management. So let's go to our experience, go to incoming, and we can see we have this webhook URL. Let's copy this URL and then go into our application here on Heroku, go to More, View Webhooks, and then create a webhook. We can give it a name. Let's just call it Heroku to Oracle Content Management. And for the payload URL, we want to paste that webhook URL that we just took from Oracle Content Management in here. And what we really care about is the build created build status for this build. So this should be the only box you need to check. Once we have this, we can add the webhook, and it looks good here. So now let's go to our experiences, outgoing, and click test one more time. Looks like our request has been sent, and we see that there's this build in progress. Let's go to our events tab. I believe this is the build in progress, the one that we just sent. And then let's go to refresh again. And there's a third one now. The third one here represents when Heroku sends back the status that it is currently pending on the build. And then there should be another one on the fourth one that the build succeeded. As you can tell here, it's a little bit hard to process what's going on within all of these JSON objects. So there's this analyze feature that we can use to analyze what's going on in each of these objects. Let's add 4 introspection strings, which come from, if we go to task 5, let's add these 4 introspection strings. So the first one, HTTPS. And we need these double brackets. That's just the documentation that is associated with the Experience Orchestration Analyze tab. So let's apply these changes. And we go to the Events tab, and we can see that those Analyze introspection strings are showing up down here. Let's refresh here. So in this first one here, this was the first outgoing request from Oracle Content Management to Heroku saying, let's start a build. This is Heroku coming back to Oracle Content Management in one of the incoming webhooks saying, I've started a build, it's pending. And that's the same thing from Heroku back to Oracle Content Management saying, I've started a build, it is now succeeded. So we have the complete experience orchestration process for Heroku in this one experience. Why this is really important is we can now connect content repositories and publishing channels to headless experiences deployed on Heroku that automatically trigger builds based on, in this case, publishes in this channel, or you can also do changes in a different repository. And we can do all of this without ever having to leave Oracle Content Management. Content editors can preview all these headless applications in context and with content. So let's go through the experience orchestration process. Let's close this. Let's go to the asset. And we're dealing with this getting started repository. Let's search for the how-to asset. In here, we see the OCE getting started, how-to asset. Let's edit the asset. Let's make it say how to make coffee. So this is the current state of the site. We're going to preview the how to make coffee here. And then let's publish this. We're publishing this to the OCE getting started channel, and let's click publish. The asset has been published, so let's go to our experiences, properties, events, refresh that. And we see that the event here appeared. We can go into Heroku and see that it's building, and this will take some time. We can also stay within Oracle Content Management and click this little I button. We didn't specify an experience URL, but we do have the Heroku build API endpoint here. And we can see this site currently. It is still building, so we're going to wait for this to say how to make coffee. But the full process would be under the assets, you would publish an asset, and then that would trigger a build in Heroku. of which you'd have to wait a little bit for the build to finish. But when it is done, you can come here, click on that little I button, and see that preview within Oracle Content Management. So content editors would never have to leave Oracle Content Management to be able to deploy their own builds and see them in context here with this content. So it looks like this build finished. Let's open the application. It now says how to make coffee. If we go here, close this, we open it again. This now says how to make coffee. You can click launch here to launch that site as well. So that's it from my end. Thank you for watching this video about how you can use the experience orchestration feature in Oracle Content Management with Heroku for deployment and preview purposes. Thank you and have fun building.